Welcome to week 6 of my webinar Unhitched Shorts series. This is part 5 of how to know whether to stay or go. These webinars are a series of short, easily digestible webinars. Sometimes an hour is just a little bit too much. And I just wanted to cover some of the areas in my practice where I get the most questions and issues that come up. In hopes that they will help you. So in part 1 of how to know whether to stay or go, we looked at considerations, questions to ask before you go. And then in parts 2 and beyond, we have been looking at collecting clues and all the various tools and exercises that I use in my practice to help folks gather information so they can make the best decision for themselves and their family. So you are in the right place if you are in the stay or go zone. And this is a zone where you are considering maybe you don't want to stay in your marriage. And you can ride that teeter-totter for a long, long time. I did myself. And so the reason that I'm doing this particular series that ended up being multi-part, I expected it to be maybe 1 or 2, but now we've ended up with about 5 parts, is because I didn't have a lot of these tools when I was going through this, and I want to make sure that you have all the information available to you as you are collecting clues. So before we dive deeper, just a little bit about who I am. So of course, my name is Sunny Joy McMillan. I am a recovering attorney and a practicing coach. I am the host of the radio show Sunny in Seattle. I'm also the author of the Amazon bestseller Unhitched, Unlock Your Courage and Clarity to Unstick Your Bad Marriage. My work has been featured in Oprah Magazine and Best Self Magazine and Hay House Radio, among other places. And as I've said before, I think more importantly than anything else, any credentials that I have is the fact that I am a divorcee who went from a high conflict marriage to a surprisingly graceful divorce to an even more surprising, really, really close post-divorce friendship with my ex-husband. And so I'm passionate about this because, as I mentioned, I didn't have a lot of these tools that I'm going to share with you and have shared in past webinars and will share in future webinars. And I want you all to not stay in the stay or go zone longer than you need to be there. And part of the reason that I'm doing today's stay or go part, which is getting irreverent to get answers, is because I think that there are sometimes that we don't allow ourselves to fully go to our truth. There are certain parts of ourselves that we aren't culturally encouraged to go to or explore. And so I want to give you a safe space today to go to those deeper parts of yourself and to go to the places that maybe you don't explore very often, in hopes that you will get even more information that you can gather and, as I said, collect the clues to help you make this decision. So one of the reasons I think we don't always go to these deeper parts of ourselves or to our bedrock integrity truth is because we're afraid if we acknowledge what our truth is that we're going to have to act on it. And you may feel inspired to act on it, but I just want to tell you that for purposes of today, we're just exploring here. And if you find information that scares you, that's okay. You do not have to act on it unless you feel so inspired to do so. So I just want to give you permission to go there today, even if just for a short little while, and to say what you want. It's okay to want what you want, even if it's different than what you wanted yesterday or a year ago or 10 years ago. Just acknowledging what we want, because I think we are not often encouraged to want what we want, and we may suppress our own desires at our own expense to not disappoint, to impress, to not hurt others. So today, let yourself go there. So my own story, and I've mentioned this in I think a couple of the past webinars, but when I was growing up, there were some caveats to, if you get married, you stay married, divorce is not an option. And there were only a few caveats. Number 1, is he an abuser? Number 2, is he an addict? Number 3, is he an adulterer? And in my own marriage, my ex-husband, or my then husband, was not any of those things. But what ended up happening was the marriage that I wanted when I got married ended up being very different than what I wanted once I started doing some of my own personal transformation work, some of my own therapy, some of my own growth. And I realized that as an adult, my values had changed from what I started with in my teens and 20s. And what I wanted in a partner and what I wanted in a relationship was very different. And despite all of the work that my then husband and I put into it, we just couldn't seem to change these high conflict patterns and patterns of separation and disconnection. And it seemed beyond repair. And so that's when I made the decision that what I had wanted years before was not what I wanted when I reached midlife. And ultimately that meant for me leaving the marriage. And it may be a very different outcome for you, but I say that because it was very hard not to have a reason to point to get divorced. And a lot of my clients have a reason, but a lot of them don't as well. And I didn't have a specific thing I could point to except I just didn't want this relationship and this marriage anymore. And that was okay. Of course, maybe it wasn't okay with my then husband when we started going down that road. Maybe it wasn't okay with some family members, but what was important was what was okay for me. And I had to do what was right for me, because ultimately I think the truth is kinder, and it would not have been in integrity for me to stay in the marriage when I did not align with what was happening in the marriage anymore. Okay, so as we dive into content, I just want to preface this. We're going to be doing 20 minutes here today. And I've been going closer to 30, but I'm really going to try to keep it closer to 20 minutes today, because that was the original idea. And as I mentioned, past weeks, we've been collecting clues. We looked at questions that you need to ask. We looked at the body, the mind, and the spirit. Body as a messenger, mind, how to deal with your thoughts and beliefs that are keeping you stuck, what to do with the marriage story that you were given when you were younger, especially if it doesn't align with where you are today. And then, of course, spirit was last week, looking at inner guidance, inner wisdom, intuition, and all of that good stuff for answers. So today we are getting irreverent to get answers. And you may want to get a pen and paper out. I'm going to be doing a couple of little writing prompts for you, little short fill in the blank things. It won't take long, so you're welcome to do them in your head, but you may want to write them down, because it's kind of neat to look back and see if there are themes in your answers. And if you can't quite remember everything you did, it may be nice to have it written down on paper. I won't be taking any questions today, so we can keep this nice and short. And also, these are usually pretty personal issues. So if you do want to ask questions or take this further, I will tell you how to do so at the end. And of course, you can continue showing up to these Unhitched webinar shorts, because I'll be doing them for the foreseeable future. So yes, we are getting irreverent today. That's the whole point, is to get irreverent, to get answers. But I just want to also state that I have great respect for the institution of marriage and for keeping your commitments and taking responsibility for vows that you've made. So as I've mentioned in past webinars, getting divorced often trades one set of problems for another. And sometimes that's the right answer. Sometimes the pain of staying put exceeds the fear of the unknown and some of the new problems that will come up in divorce. And that's the right answer for you. But I just want to say that as we're getting irreverent, I do not mean to make light of an institution and a commitment that you've made. I just want you to be able to access deeper parts of yourself and information that may ultimately be very helpful in making your decision. And so as we are collecting clues and getting irreverent, I mentioned this before, but I want to just extend the invitation to you to go there, to go to these deeper places of yourself and give yourself permission to just look, even if briefly, to your truth, whatever that may be. And sometimes, it's difficult to hear this voice of the deeper part of ourself. And for purposes of today, I'm going to call it social self and essential self. If you are students of Martha Beck or know her work, of course, this comes from her tradition. But really, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it your higher self and your human self. You can call it your meta self and meat self. You can call it your big self and small self, whatever. It really doesn't matter. But the point is, there are usually these two elements of our psyche And you've got the social self, which is the part of you that developed in response to the people around you. We talked in a past webinar about how we're in a really slow brainwave state when we're little. That's so we can absorb everything around us. We're basically like little programmable sponges. So this social self is the part of you that developed in response to the people around you. Your culture, your religion, your family of origin, the values, the politics, the opinions that they hold. And so this is the part of you that wants to please, to not disappoint, to always impress. And so that part of you often is more worried about what other people think. Then you've got this other part of your psyche that we'll call the essential self. This is the deepest part of you. It's basically, what comes in your DNA, your personality. It's the part of you that would transcend no matter where you were born, whether you're born in Africa or the United States or Asia, whether you were born into a Christian family, a Muslim family, a Hindu family, it wouldn't matter. This is the part of you that, stripped of all the bells and whistles, will go with you wherever you are. So usually the social self and the essential self can be at odds. I mean, it's great if the two align, but that doesn't happen very often. And so what can happen is that this voice of our most essential self will get drowned out by the voice of our social self in the desire to fit in and to be loved, which is normal. I mean, think about from a human evolutionary perspective, if you didn't fit in with the tribe, you were left behind, put outside the walls of the city, left behind after the tribe moved on, and you died. It was a very harsh reality back then. So we did everything to fit in because it meant survival. Now, that's not really the case now, but it can feel like death if you get ostracized from your community or your family of origin or your religion. But it's not life or death. And really, our best life is the one that is aligned with our most essential self. So today, I want to get in touch with that voice, the voice of your truth that knows your best destiny. And so sometimes, it can be hard to hear that voice. And I want to share a quick story about a friend of mine. She's mentioned in my book. So I share this story with permission with her real name. So her name is Tara, and she developed a blood disease. It's a very, very rare blood disease. And usually folks who have this blood disease, the chances of survival after age 50 are like 5%. So most people who have this blood disease die before age 50. And she's in her mid-40s now, I think 45. So by most medical accounts, she is living on borrowed time. So she's already a little bit special in that regard. So then factor in, she had a surgery to help slow the progress of her disease. It was an attempt to help slow the progression of this very rare blood disease that she has. While she was undergoing surgery, she had an abdominal aortic aneurysm. And so everyone has heard the word aneurysm. And so it's very rare to get one here, abdominal aortic aneurysm. And the mortality rate, I think, is something like 95 to 97%. So only 3 to 5% of people who experience this kind of aneurysm live to tell. And she lived. In fact, she had a near-death experience while she was undergoing this surgery when this aneurysm happened. And so she is miraculous in many, many ways for the reasons that I've just mentioned, and some other ones too. She's a very special person. But the point being that when she came back from this near-death experience and surviving this blood disease and surviving this aortic aneurysm, she kind of had a wake-up call. And what she calls it, I'm not going to say it here in case you have kids around and this is not suitable for work, but she called it basically her F it phase. We'll just call it your screw it phase for purposes of today, so it's a little bit easier language on the ears. But basically for her, when you have those kind of wake-up calls, you take stock of your life. You look at your work, you look at your friendships, you look at your marriage for sure. And it allows you to potentially make decisions that are more reflective of your essential self, because basically it's just like, screw it. The worst of the worst has happened, so I'm going to do what I actually want to do, and I'm going to speak my truth and live it. And that's what she did in her own life. And so she took a hard look at a lot of things and changed a lot of things in her life. So Not everyone has to have an experience like that. You may have, and that may be your wake-up call to listen to that essential part of yourself. But if you haven't had an experience like that and you're still a little frightened, then what we're going to do today, and this is just one small exercise, and I call it in the book a screw it look at your marriage. And this is just basically the way to get to the voice underneath your social self. So this would be the place for you to grab that pen and paper and just get ready to answer a few prompts as I read them off to you. So fill in the blank, complete these sentences. So number one, when it comes to my marriage, if I didn't care what people thought, and by people I mean your family, your friends, your pastor, your church congregation, your community, your neighbors, your colleagues. So those are the people that I'm talking about. When it comes to my marriage, if I didn't care what people thought, I would what? Fill in the blank. Okay, next question. When it comes to my marriage, if I were sure that my actions would not hurt others in any way, I would what? When it comes to my marriage, if I had the courage, I would what? Fill in the blank. Next question. When it comes to my marriage, if I had total clarity that it was the right choice, I would what? Next question. When it comes to my marriage, if I could be certain it would not affect my children negatively, I would what? Fill in the blank. Next question. When it comes to my marriage, if I knew I would be okay financially, I would what? Fill in the blank. Okay, and final question. If I could be certain my life would be as good or even better following my divorce, I would do the following when it comes to my marriage. What would you do? So looking back over your answers or thinking back over what came through for you, what themes or threads run through your answers? And it may have been the same answer for every single question. I've had that happen before. And so looking at these answers, answering these questions in a way that really asks you to go deep, forget what everybody else thinks, forget everything else concerned in the situation just for a moment. Do you have a better sense of how your essential self might act with your social self out of the way, basically, around your marriage? And if your answers scare you, or basically, and you can see my kitty cat is joining us for the webinar today. I find it's easier than trying to close them out. Fun of working from home. But if your answers scare you or point you in a direction that you're not quite ready to go, that is okay. Again, we are just collecting information for purposes of today. This is just to allow you to get to that truth, even if you don't do anything with it today or forever. I just want you to get in the practice of getting in touch with your truth. So you may feel inspired to take action, that's great, but otherwise there are no action implications required with what you found out today. So I just want to mention a few pitfalls that I see in working with people around getting to this truth of your essential self. And number one, it is a fear of going there. As I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes we are afraid that if we go there, then it means we have to act on it. We have to do something with it immediately. And that's not necessarily the case. It just means you can separate the two. Get to your truth and then decide what to do about it later. And what can often happen when we avoid the truth, when we suppress it, when we don't get in touch with it is, there's this great quote from Nancy Levin that says, we create self-imposed chaos when we avoid the truth. And for Nancy, when she avoided the truth that she didn't want to be in her marriage anymore, it was a pretty unhealthy, dysfunctional marriage. She ended up having an affair. She had an affair several years before this happened. But she wrote about it in her journal and then happened to leave the journal lying around in her home. So you don't just leave a journal around with very explicit details of your affair. where your spouse can find it, unless on some level, consciously or subconsciously, you want it to be the bomb that blows everything up. So I have many instances of this happening with clients where you're not wanting to get in your truth, and so you just things start seeping out in very unhealthy or unexpected ways. So that's the number one thing I see, avoiding the truth. And the number two one is not going to the truth because you're afraid you have to act on it. And as I mentioned before, just because you acknowledge your truth, just because you can express what you want, and it's okay to want what you want, just because you go there doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. Once you have that information, you can actually then think, okay, I want to improve the marriage and see if that will work, and then come back to this truth. Or you can take steps immediately if you feel inspired to do so. So if you need some help finding your truth, if you need some help acting on the truth that you found or knowing what to do with it, then I'm going to put my link to my scheduler here in the chat box if you are viewing the webinar today and you want to hop on my schedule and we can talk about it. Oops, that is not the right cut and paste. Let me try this again. Oh dear. Hang with me. Just cut and pasted the whole thing out. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, here is the link. Okay, so if you are listening to this or watching it at a later date and don't have access to the chat box, I will invite you to download a free copy of my book, Unhitched, and you can do that by going to unhitchedbook.com. That's unhitchedbook.com, and there you can, of course, download the free copy of my book, which has a lot of this information, and it also has a way to get in touch with me. So I thank you for being here today for the final part of how to know whether to stay or go. Join me next week as we are going to be exploring how to deal with fear, because I see the number one reason that people stay when they know that they know that they know that they need to go is fear. So how to deal with it. Okay, thanks again for joining me. See you.